My name is Jonah Jonathan, and welcome once again to the Jazz Musician's Voice. Today I'm really pleased to speak with drummer Mike Clark, really a legend in the drumming, especially in the funk and jazz style of drumming. In fact, was a member of Herbie Hancock's legendary group of Headhunters in the 70s and the whole fusion era. But also an extensive drummer on the jazz scene, has worked with many of the great legends of this music. We're really pleased to speak with him because he's going through some health issues, recently had surgery for kidney stents, and was just gracious enough to speak with us. And he shares about his life in the music, really was a prodigy and has played with so many great musicians. He's also got some stories on Miles Davis that I will be sharing. So thanks for watching this interview. Check out Mike Clark. Check out the links in the description. Share with your friends, and stay tuned. We've got a lot more future videos coming. And yeah, thanks for watching.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased today to speak with really one of the heavyweights of jazz and funk drumming today, Mike Clark. And thanks so much for speaking with me, Mike. And thanks for taking the time. You've got some health issues, and we appreciate it that you could talk with us. So for people who aren't familiar with your music, talk a little bit about how you guys started in music. You're initially from California, from Sacramento, California, right?
I am. My father was a drummer, and he stopped playing when he was about 19 or 20. But he always had. He played his jazz records like all day and night. And plus, that was his party music, and he was a serious party type person. He loved hanging out and having friends over, and there was always a drum set there in the house. So when I was about four, I've been hearing its music all the time before I could talk or walk, because he played it all the time. So I guess I internalized it somehow, as a baby, and when I could move around kind of on my own, I walked over to the drum set and I started playing. I could immediately play. I played kind of like a Gene Krupa tom-tom, sing, sing, sing type solo, and it all made sense. And my father was like, wow, he was overjoyed, So him and my mother took me to a nightclub that night and had me play with his buddies that he used to be in the band. And they played straight ahead. And I had to stand up because I couldn't reach the pedals. But I played this tom-tom solo and I got house. I remember, I can still see me doing it. And I knew to go ding jang a lang on the ride cymbal. It was weird. It was kind of there. It was there. And then after that, I played in the house like every day, and he would take me to every jazz gig. He was a railroad man and he traveled. So we traveled everywhere: New Orleans, Atlanta, Philly, this, that, Baltimore, da da da. And he'd take me to jazz gigs constantly, and then also pay the band or drummer. And in those days, it's the 50s. So you just buy a guy, usually you give a guy $5 or buy the band a drink, and yeah, let him play. So I played with everybody, man, a whole slew of guys. So by the time I was 7 or 8, I had a lot of experience. So when I got in school band, I could really, I was way ahead of everybody. It sort of balanced itself out later, it usually does. But that was a big growth period for me, and I played all the time. I didn't ever have a lesson. I never had lessons. I had a guy teach me to read.
Well, that's really incredible. I mean, you're like a prodigy, and in that sense, many of us young musicians at that time, like my dad did the same thing. He would come with me and let me sit in on gigs, and he would drive me places, and that's awesome that you got to go traveling so much on trains and stuff, and really absorbing all this music. Talk about some of the music you were seeing, because that's a kind of legendary era of music. You know, you're born
Well,
in the 40s, so
yeah.
by the time you were a kid, you know, you're running into like, you must have been running into that early rock and roll, R&B, soul, all that, you know.
Well, his interest was in jazz, of course. So I heard everybody from, I heard, I can't name them all, of course, you know, like Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Harry James, Louis Armstrong, and then whoever it was that wasn't that well known that were playing in jazz clubs, we would go and see if I could sit in, and if not, I would just sit and absorb the stuff. But it was also not only a lot of cultural stuff, also regional. You know what I mean? I was already checking out that people in New Orleans played different than people in Chicago. You know, it was same tunes, the same music, but something else, you know, a little something different from each place I'd go. And then I he brought home an Art Blakey record. He didn't know who Art Blakey was because you know he was into more big band swing and all this. And I was about 8 years old or 9, and I heard Art Blakey, and I went, yeah, man, this is where I want to go. I knew, and I just went that whatever that is. I didn't know what they call it. I didn't know bebop. No, I just went that. So then he started taking me to hear Cannonball and Art Blakey and this one and that one. And my record collection started shifting from Benny Goodman to these people and Count Basie and what have you. And then I ended up as a teen in Texas. And because I was an advanced drummer as a teen, I could work. And nobody asked you about your ID. Nobody cared in those days. Nobody said anything to me. Once I became 15 or 14 or so, I would just, every once in a while, if somebody got jealous that I was on a gig and they felt that they should have the gig, they'd call the cops on me. But that happened, I think that only happened once actually. And the guy that did it was a soul singer named Mighty Joe Hicks. And he was a friend of mine. And I quit his band and joined another band. And he ratted me out. But in Texas, I was trying to make myself known as a jazz drummer. Of course, I never thought about playing any funk or any of this. So I liked it, and it wasn't that popular yet. And I got because I could swing. I got offered a lot of blues gigs. So as a young teenager, man, I played with Freddie King, Albert King, Jimmy Reed, Jimmy Hughes, O.C. Smith. I mean, I can't even think of all of the guys. Whoever was on that circuit, and how I ended up playing with them, I wasn't in their band. I worked in a couple of nightclubs. I was a popular drummer in a couple of nightclubs, so they'd keep me on, and those guys would come through and we'd back them up. Ray
Wow.
Sharp, yeah, and
Talk about like, because you know, as someone who likes to study the ethnography of stuff, like I wrote about the Harlem scene and stuff. Talk about like what it was like to be in some of these clubs as a teenager. You know, like especially in those times, it must have still been like some of that segregation going on and stuff. So
totally segregated.
you
Totally
know,
segregated. And
so
then
you as a young white player with these black guys, I mean, it must be an interesting thing, you know.
it was. Well, first of all, you know, when you're young in those days, you're not thinking like that. You're innocent. You're not thinking this guy's black, that guy's this, I'm that. I'm just wanting to play, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
So yeah, so you're not seeing, I mean, I'm aware of prejudice and I'm aware because my father made me aware because we're California people living in the South. And when I was 6 years old, I played with the only black band that was allowed on the Bourbon Street in the 50s was a guy named Octave Crosby. And he liked my drumming when I was a little boy, and I would come in and play with him, and the cops took me out of there. They removed me. I mean, not
Wow.
they didn't beat me up. They moved, but I didn't understand. And they said, well, you're going to cause a riot. So they scolded me and my father, and I could just see it now. It was under this big street lamp, in New Orleans. And I'm like, what did I do wrong? Plus, I was in the middle of a solo on Sweet Georgia Brown, so it did piss my ass off, quite frankly, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but later in my teen years, I played with a wide variety of fellow air-breathing earthlings. Like I would play the Chitlin Circuit a lot. And the reason I got those gigs is because most of the jazz drummers at that time couldn't play funk very well. It sounded more like Horace Silver kind of funk, boogaloo, which is cool, but these guys wanted more of the R&B kind of sound, and I had it because I was that age, and there was no jazz station, you listened to the radio in the car, and you always listened to rhythm and blues. I never listened to rock and roll. I hated it, you know. And so uh, so I knew how to. I kind of could play the James Brown beats really. I didn't have to rehearse. I didn't have to practice the beats. I could hear it, and because I played so much jazz, I was like, "Oh, I see what he's doing." And then a lot of guys on those blues gigs when I was young, nobody was mean to me. They would show me how to get a good backbeat. Cats would come up and say, "You got to mash down on it a little bit after you hit it." You know what I mean? Like cats would teach me things, and I was respectful and would listen. You know. And so I developed a good shuffle and a good backbeat and a good funk groove to play with these guys. And they liked me. And so, the crowds were black. And some of them were sawdust floor joints like you read about. And you bring brown bag joints. You come in they serve you with setup ice and ginger ale, and then you bring your own booze and pour it in there, you know. And of course, these guys also turned me on to a lot of weed, so I got stoned very young. And then when I would hear and see and feel oriented things, it would strike me deeply because I was stoned, so I was paying attention. And I'm like, whoa, you know what I mean? And like I'm
Yeah.
trying to, and I I didn't question my place in it because these guys kept calling me. And every once in a while they tease me about being white. It was cool.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
all the guys were real nice to me, but nobody ever was nasty. They would just be teasing me, sometimes.
Well, I think I mean, when we talk about the history of all the people you've played with, I mean, I think you've earned your place as an honorary person of this music,
That's
as a disciple. I mean, man, Albert King, for example. I mean, all those blues guys. That stuff is incredible. And you know,
But one thing I I did get to see, I was fortunate enough to get to see, was the other America. And a lot of white people don't get to see that America, and they don't know that it's there. And I don't see it like a black person because I'm white, but I saw it, bro. And that changed my life forever, in every way, you know.
oh,
That's all
wow.
I can say about that. Jesus Christ.
Let's talk about like funk more because this is something. I mean, you definitely are. You what so-called, from what I read, is the what's the East Bay sound, the distinctive East Bay sound and funk drumming in the California scene.
Well, I was I had moved to Oakland, and I was playing almost seven. In those days, you had so much work, you play 7 nights a week. You work all the time. We used to sneak out of working, like pretend to be sick because you'd kill yourself. You'd be playing every night. And we made money, man. We were young people that owned cars, and I bought a house and all kinds of stuff. And um, Paul Jackson walked into my gig one night. I didn't know him from a can of paint, just some dude that came in and sat down, but he kept staring at me. And so on the break, I went over and I said, "Okay, I know you're a musician because you've been peeping me out all night. I'm Mike Clark." And he said, "Hey, I'm Paul Jackson." He said, "I'd love to come up and play." Now, this is an organ band that I had in this club. So I said, "Well, what do you play?" He said, "Well, I'm a bass player, but I can play organ as well." And I said, "Okay, come on up next set." So he came up and he killed on the organ. He wasn't a great organ player, but there was so much blues and so much feeling and so much soul. Like this dude was dripping with it, and he knocked me out. So I said, "Give me your number before you leave, please." And so that night, I gave him my number, and I had a business card. And that night when I got home, back to Oakland, this was out in Walnut Creek somewhere. When I got home that night, he was sitting in my driveway waiting for me. I'd never met this guy before. And he had some African hashish and a bottle of wine. He said, "Hey, man, I've been waiting for you. You want to hang out?" And I'm like, "Yeah, come on in." And that was the beginning of me and Paul. And man, we hung out every day for 30 years after that. We became best friends and inseparable, inseparable. And we finally got a place together because both of our girlfriends threw us out. This is true. And so Paul's father got us a place out in East Oakland, and it became the epicenter for hanging, playing, rehearsing, girlfriends, eating, all the musicians were over all the time. So we started a bunch of bands. But they were all jazz bands. And then Paul one day came over with a Fender bass and he just stuck it in the music room and left it in there for a year. Never went near it because he played the big bass. And one day he picked up the Fender bass and plugged it into an amp. And he said, "Play some of that funky stuff you play." So I did, and he played something that was perfect. It went with it. It was perfect. And now to your question about the Oakland sound, it was kind of like these broken, displaced 16th notes. David Garibaldi, a dear friend of mine with the Tower of Power, and myself were kind of the guys that made that style well known. I had my version of it and he had his. And I didn't do it unless Paul was there. Otherwise, I played jazz. I'm like a real heavy jazz head. I'd be like, "Yeah, that's cool, but I want to play jazz. I want to swing, man." So next to where we lived, there was a barbecue joint called Everett and Jones. And they had just moved up from Georgia, and they were right next door to where we lived. So we'd smell the food coming in every day, and we'd go over there and eat constantly. I'm surprised we didn't have heart attacks because we just ate ribs and potato salad every day. Right? We were
Yeah,
young, we were having
yeah,
fun. So Mrs. Jones said, "If you guys record, I'm gonna if you we're gonna advertise on KDIA, which was the soul station in Oakland. And if you record something, we'll feed you free for a month." And we're like, "Oh yeah, you got it." So we wrote on a napkin while we were waiting for our order. We wrote, because you couldn't sit down in there. You had to stand up and wait to get your order. We wrote a tune called "God Make Me Funky." And people could hear it. Then they started advertising the food on KDIA, and you could hear us in the background. And people were calling in saying, "What's that song?" And they liked the song. So we recorded it later with the Headhunters, and it sold 100,000 records, and it became one of the most sampled drum loops in hip hop. Probably not anymore, but for a while, every DJ had to have that loop. And uh, so that's what happened with the funk thing. And then me and Paul are doing that, but then I'm playing with a guy named Vince Guaraldi, and I'm playing with Bobby Hutcherson and Woody Shaw. So I'm ensconced in this jazz thing. So Paul Jackson gets a gig with Herbie Hancock, and I'm elated for him. I'm like, "Wow, that's fantastic." And he says, yeah, but we're going to play funk. And I'm like, who cares? It's Herbie Hancock. Geez. So, I mean, like, play whatever. Play whatever he wants to. So Harvey Mason did the first record. And then he had such a lucrative studio career that he didn't want to go on the road for $300 a week or something like that. So Herbie called me on Paul's recommendation. And I'd been talking to Hancock on the phone quite a bit anyway, because he was calling to talk to Paul over to the house, and Paul was never home. So I'd end up talking to Herbie for hours. And
Wow.
he's a hell of a conversationalist. Talk about anything, Muhammad Ali, boxing, cars, whatever, and jazz, the whole nine, Tony Williams, Elvin, whatever you feel like. A great guy. And so he said, well, I hear you play your own style of funk. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Why don't you play with me and see what you think? So he did, and he hired me. You know what I mean? And that's the story, And so I went on the road with him, and I stayed in that band for, I think, 4 years. But then my my desire to play jazz was overriding my desire to be in that band, and they were getting more commercial and more straight and more straight. And pretty soon I was just playing a 2/4 backbeat with no singer. I'm backing up. I felt like I didn't like it at this point. I loved it when I first
Yeah.
got in the band. We were playing Actual Proof and all this like challenging music. And then it became like a top 40 gig kind of. So I had to get out of there,
Well, talk a little bit more about Herbie, because such a unique guy. I mean, came up doing his stuff in the '60s. Some of those recordings and the whole Watermelon Man thing. Play with Miles, and then start going in this electric fusion direction. Especially with all those keyboards back then, those are huge instruments. You gotta have all those things. He must have been carrying all of that with him. But yeah, eventually went into more of that more pop type of sound, which probably is not so jazz interesting,
Oh, he's an amazing guy. First of all, he's a champion of humanity. He really is. He's the most amazing. He's a genius, and he's accessible. He's funny as hell. He's fun, And the hang is great. He's smart, and he's a great guy. He's a great guy. So it was fun being with him. I liked being with him more than I did playing the music he was playing, because I wanted to play jazz too. But I think what happened to him, in my estimation, would be that he ran out of money with M1DC. He couldn't afford to keep the band on the road. And he already had a lot of that equipment from his experience with that band, because he was using the ring modulator and the this and the Rhodes and so I think, and he from Fat Albert also, he was kind of leaning towards, he liked funky music, he liked Sly, he loved James Brown, so he was I think it was timely for him, because I think he wanted to make this move. And I mean, this guy had played all those great records he made on as a leader and a sideman, and then the Miles stuff, having that behind him at 30 years old. He wanted to do something different. He didn't want to go back and repeat the Blue Note stuff like everybody wanted, He'd done it all. And he's the kind of guy that he keeps moving, maybe not in the direction people would like to see him go, but he keeps moving, And I think it served him well, man. He had a bunch of hit records, and he changed his life.
Yeah.
He was in debt when we met him.
Now, I bet you didn't think about it at the time, but now a lot of those videos on YouTube, Actual Proof, all that stuff, you probably might not even known they were filming, but now that's like those videos have millions of views online, and that is complicated music. I've played some of that stuff on electric.
Yeah.
Paul was doing, you know, so, and you on drums, like are that even though, like, yes, you are equally established jazz player, I think the funk thing kind of got you a whole different audience with like people in like these drum shops and drum camps and such, you know. But
It sure did. Didn't see that one coming, you know, but
yeah,
it did. But I liked what we did on Thrust. I liked what the band was doing the first couple of years because we were experimenting and trying to find something different and new. We were challenging ourselves and each other. But then I could see that it was starting to become a commercial type of organization, and I was starting to become unhappy. You know, and
yeah,
I
yeah,
was young. I wanted to play. I mean, I don't care. Even if you're playing with a guy who's famous, you want to do your thing. You want people to know who you are musically, you know. But yes, it was a completely rewarding experience on a million levels, not just musically, all the way around. It was like
yeah.
unbelievable, fantastic, you know.
Well, you know, as a drummer, as a jazz drummer, I mean, man, like you said, you work extensively with so many diverse names on hundreds of recordings. You know, uh, Woody Shaw, Tony Bennett, John Scofield, Nicholas Payton, Billy Childs, Donald Harrison, Chris Potter, Eddie Harrison, Lonnie Smith Jr. Man, talk about some of these names. Who are some of your favorite jazz musicians to have played with over your extensive career?
Well, two come to mind right away. One would be Eddie Henderson, who's a dear friend of mine and a marvelous musician. And Eddie hears everything. He hears the whole picture. So you don't have to worry about comping for him. He doesn't need you to help him. He's already there. You know, when he before he even takes the stage, he's there. Uh, he's wonderful, and also Donald Harrison is a brilliant artist, and he's got so much soul and funk in him that it's crazy. I mean, and he's also understands Charlie Parker, the schematic, the harmonically, he's very advanced. He can address anything at any time, and he's one of my favorite artists to play with and people to be with. Uh, I don't know this guy very well, but I played a gig the other night with Wayne Escoffery, and George Cables was on the gig, and I was really spiritually lifted real high by George's playing.
Yeah,
It knocked me out because he plays all of this magnificent stuff, but it's all inside the groove. It's all in the swing. It's all inside the collage. It's a conversation. It's just amazing. I love playing with bassist Gerald Cannon and Essiett. I think they're marvelous players. Um, uh, there's a guitarist here named Jack Wilkins, who many people know, a well-known guitarist. He's one of the best jazz musicians I've ever worked with. It's crazy what he hears and the places you can visit with him. Um, I love, well, I played with Woody Shaw when I was young, but I really dug playing with, he's a drummer's trumpet player. You can play all the drums you want behind that guy, and there's not going to be a problem. You know what I mean? Like, had that kind of fire, and plus he was an interesting guy to hang with. Um, I love all those guys, man. I mean, I can't think, there's not too many people that I don't like to play with, especially out of the names you just mentioned. Um, I just I recorded, I'm on Eddie's new record, Shuffle and Deal, which is, I see it's number 3 on the charts right now, on the Jazz Weekly charts. And that's with Donald, Gerald Cannon, myself, and Kenny Barron. Oh, Kenny Barron's another guy I don't know well, but I played maybe 4 or 5 gigs with him. But man, sure is
incredible.
fun.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Well,
shoot,
you
these
know,
cats just,
yeah, you're talking about some of the real greats. I mean, you're quite a humble guy. I mean, you're not gonna push yourself uh, to us, but for us young guys, I mean, when you do the extensive research on drummer Mike Clark, man, you played on so many legendary recordings. Uh, what would be your advice to young drummers who want to follow in your footsteps of being a successful drummer? You know.
well, provided that COVID lets up and that we have an America left when all of this goes one way or the
Yeah.
other here, I would say that play with practicing is great. Drumming technique is fun. Coordination, all that, it's challenging and it's like a athletic almost. It's fun. I like it. But my favorite thing is playing with human beings, playing with the band. So I say get all the experience you can playing with a band and playing with people, whether it's even if it's not in a club for money, wherever. That's where you find out what you can do and what you can't do. That's the proving ground right there. And that's how you learn how to blend and swing and get funky and, excuse me, and play. You know,
Yeah.
that's where it goes down. It's the practice room is great and having chops is great. I I got my drum set here. I shed, but playing with the cat, playing with the band, that's it. So I say get as
Yeah.
much of that as you can.
Well, I mean, you're coming actually up on your birthday, 74th birthday now. Man, you lived in one of the greatest periods of music. I mean, so much great music happened at that time. And so, from what I gather, and you said you didn't take much lessons. Talk about now about jazz education and music education in general, because so you come from more of a doing it on the gig kind of scene, whereas now young players, there's not enough gigs for that, so they go to music schools in that aspect.
Yeah,
You know.
well, I think it's fantastic. I know a lot of guys talk bad about music schools or feel uh, one where I hear, different. To me, I wished I could have gone because you're going to learn to read. You're going to have a chance to play with people all the time in those classrooms, and you're going to be around a lot of your peers, like, uh, so um, that wasn't there. There was only a few music schools when I was coming up, and I could have gone to a college in Sacramento that would have let me play with the band, but it was like the band was terrible. Band was terrible, and they didn't play jazz. And I was already working and making a living, and I'm like, nah. So, but one thing I had in my environment was all these great drummers. I would go every chance I could. Lenny White was a friend of mine. I'd go hear him every chance I could. I'd go hear Philly Joe, Max Roach. I'm not going to name obviously Elvin and Tony, everybody, every chance I could, and then I'd try to meet them and talk to them, Art Blakey, all of them, and try to glean something about what they were doing. And each guy would eventually tell me a little something that helped me understand where they were coming from as artists and what they were doing. Because um, most of those guys told me to be sure and have my own style. Don't copy. They say you can take some of my licks, but don't try to be me. You know what? You got to be you. But yeah, I think music education, what's wrong with that? The more you can learn, the better. But still, the playing, no matter what degree you have on the wall or anything, playing jazz music, that's where you find out. That's where the rubber. Many artists that can say it better than I can, but they don't have the experience to play it,
Yeah,
with
yeah,
confidence. It takes a
yeah.
lifetime. I'm still trying to learn how to play, man. We all are. I don't
Yeah,
care how famous the guy is or how much shit he talks. Everybody's still trying to learn to play better. We're trying to grow, right?
yeah, yeah.
Leonard White, David Garibaldi, Michael Shreve, and Greg Orico from Sly and the Family Stone, the great drummers. Michael from Santana, Lenny, of course, and David Garibaldi from the Tower, and myself. We're recording on Zoom, and we call ourselves the Stick People, and we're telling our stories and telling what made us play the way we did, who politically what was going on, the climate around the Bay Area, and although Lenny and we're looking when we have people helping us to turning it into an episodic show of some kind. We're talking to Netflix and all these people. And
Hey,
the other plug I want to put in for myself is Lee Dorsey, the great bassist, Michael Wolf, the great piano player who I've been playing with forever, and myself have a record out now called Wolf, Clark, and Dorsey Play Sergeant Pepper. And I just, when I looked at Eddie Henderson's record on the charts, I see that ours just came in at number 40, so we're climbing up there. We played Beatles tunes, but straight ahead and swinging,
oh,
off
yeah.
of Sergeant Pepper. This gorgeous sister that was a girlfriend of mine, right? She was so fine, you damn near had to fight cats off on the street, right? And everybody wanted to go out with her. She was completely a knockout, and she, for some reason, she just liked me, and she liked the drumming and all this kind of thing. She didn't know who Miles Davis was or anything like that. She wasn't a music person, but she was a beautiful woman, ridiculous. So Miles is getting ready to open for Herbie Hancock, and uh, so we're doing a show somewhere, and Herbie was a playful guy, so you could sneak into it. We were all young, I'm 26, so you could sneak into his dressing room and try to tackle him or something, or like some kind of silly stuff. We always goofed around. So I come in with my girlfriend and I open the door real fast because I'm going to try to do something crazy with Hancock. And Miles Davis is sitting on the couch. And I'm like, damn, there's Miles Davis, jeez. And he's got like a hat down with the brim down like this. And he has this real hip looking leather bag. And he's smoking a cigarette. And I'm like, wow. And Hancock can talk very hip. He can talk so hip, you got to think about what it is he just said to you sometimes. But he can also talk really square and collegiate. And he says all kinds of different stuff, whatever bag he's in at that moment. So he says to Miles Davis in this voice, he goes, Miles, this is my drummer Mike Clark and his lovely girlfriend B. Her name was B. And I'm like, oh shit, that nah. And so Miles looks at me and he's like this, he checks me out, and then he looks at her and he's like, he's checking, and then he looks at it, and then he goes like this, shit. I said, man, that's not quite how I wanted this to go when I met Miles Davis. You know what I mean? But it's a funny story, man. And later on, we played opposite each other. But he was bugged because he had to open for Herbie. He didn't care for that at all because in his mind, and I can dig it, he felt like, well, I discovered this dude, and now I'm opening for him. But Herbie had sold so damn many records. And then one other time, we were playing the show, and it was me and Paul and Herbie playing at this one part of this tune, and it got so funky, I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know what was going on, man. I mean, it was otherworldly, man, and it was going down, and it's like happening to you. You're not doing, it's doing you. You're just like, oh man. And it's ridiculous, man. And especially when Hancock fires it up, forget it. That's the top of the world. Game over, man. Seriously. And Paul, oh my God. So man, I got my foot deep in it, like we're doing it. And I'm moving, I'm taking it all in and playing, and I just happen to look up, and there's somebody on the stage. I don't know. I can't. My eyes are loud. I've always been poor, not So I'm like, I think it's maybe some roadie out there doing something. So playing, and the guy moves in closer, and we're really getting funky. Now I'm on the cymbal, man. We're doing it. And it's Miles Davis, and he's doing this wicked dance that almost looks like. Do you know what stop time animation is?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Where they're shooting
Yeah,
it,
almost
the
like
clay
stop.
animation. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and his movement is almost like stop time anime. And it's the funkiest, wickedest dance I've ever seen a cat do. It was unearthly. I was
Wow.
like, Jesus, what? Oh my God. And then he comes kind of sort of near the floor, Tom, and he looks at me and Paul and he goes, "Fuck you, motherfuckers. Fuck you, funky ass motherfuckers. Fuck you, motherfucker." And then he dances off the stage, and I'm like, what the fuck was that? So anyway, I'm
Yeah.
like, wow. Anyway, we do the show, and I go back upstairs into the dressing room, and we all had, and Herbie says to me, "Man, I think Miles was really feeling you and Paul up there, man. Did you check that out?" And I went, "Yeah, I did." And so then like a jerk, I knew that him and Herbie had been at odds with each other a little bit and not getting along so great. So I tried to make it so in the most square collegiate voice that I have, I go, "Oh, Herbie, he really liked you too." And Herbie goes, "Get the fuck out of my dressing room. You don't got to tell me shit about me."
Wow.
And And Paul was like, "Ah," you know what I mean? I got back. Anyway, it was funny as hell. I had a lot of fun on
Yeah,
that, man.
I mean, I figured I would ask the story about Miles because, I always grew up listening to like kind of blue and stuff. But my dad told me he saw Miles in Hawaii when he lived in Hawaii, the Aloha Bowl, and Miles played the whole time with his back to the audience. So I always had that impression of him. And then later I took a class with Lewis Porter at Rutgers, all about Miles Davis and all those intricacies. We read the autobiography, and so yeah, he definitely developed that kind of that aura about him, or that legend, Miles Davis. But man, that's incredible to meet him.
Genius that guy, man. He changed music so many times for all of us, man. He did so. I mean, I can't even imagine what he was thinking. He was so advanced. It's like one of my huge heroes. I didn't really get to know him, but at least I had those couple of little cool interactions with him that are funny as hell to tell. And
Yeah.
I was so young, I didn't understand everything that I was dealing with. You know what I mean? I was just this young dude, and it was just like, wow. I tell my friends back home, and they had no idea what they were like. Wow. Anyway.
Well, I kind of know exactly what you're talking about when you talk about like kind of getting so funky and going out, and like it's almost like the music is playing itself. That's like it's almost a meditative thing. Man, I saw you guys playing actual proof on that YouTube video, and man, it goes out like especially when Herbie's doing that harmonic stuff that goes out. Man,
Oh
you
yeah.
guys are probably living in a different plane of existence while that's happening.
Point, every night when you'd go to work, you were ready to visit that place and take it a step farther. After a while, I wasn't even sure if Hancock was playing the form, but I'd make the hits anyway. But he was really stretching it out, man. Wow. You know, um, he just seemed to want to break the rules and break barriers. He was this kind of guy. He couldn't be contained. He refused to be contained. He's a great cat, man.
Well, Mike, thanks for doing this. Before we finish up, the final question, like, you lived such a long experience with so many of these guys aren't around anymore. Now you are reaching to your elder age. Um, what would you say? How do you feel about that? Like, some of your peers have passed already. Um, how do you keep going and keep the flame going?
Well, I feel like, except for this little health setback that I just had, I basically feel like I did when I was 20. So I do. I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that I had this kidney stone, I could still play baseball. You know what I mean? I can. I mean, it's like, and so, okay. We all know how great Buster Williams is, you know, and what a giant he is, and look at all he's done. Oh my goodness. And I was hearing him with his band with Lenny White and George Colligan and Steve Wilson a while back. And I remember feeling funny about saying this to Buster, but I said, man, I think you're improving. You're already at the top of the world. So it's not a left-handed compliment, but I said, your sound and I mean, I stayed an extra set just to listen to him because he was what he was doing. So I think if you can live the older you get, we're not like baseball players where at 45 you could be through. You know what I mean? Or a football for sure. You know what I mean? Or a boxer. You know. Um, but so if we can stay alive and take care of ourselves, we can continue to grow as artists and grow as human beings. That's what I think. I think the reason people practice and is because they're trying to polish their inner world. Of course, it seems like you want your drumming to be great, but we want us to be great people. We want to open our lives up and be beautiful and love people and give a gift. I don't want to take anything from anybody. If I can make a contribution, I'm down. I'm really down to do that if that's possible. And um, so I think we keep getting better at being humans. We learn more compassion and tolerance and uh, um, and I think we improve as artists as well. My hands, my chops are as better than they ever were, and I think I'm growing as an artist still. This COVID thing kind of stopped all of us in our tracks. So now, but I'm still thinking about it all the time, you know. Uh, and I think you try to what I polish the inside of your life so that your communications with others is pure. So it's right from the universe into, you know what I mean? Like, uh, something like that, while still being able to have a beer and have some fun and have a good time.